Hello, welcome back to Urban X Files. My name is Keith, and today we are going to talk about some haunted parts of my city. This is the city of Liverpool, and we go right into Everton, and that in Everton on Low Hill was home to Liverpool's very first municipal cemetery, which was opened on the 1st of February in 1825. Christened the Necropolis, City of the Dead, by its designer, architect John Foster Jr. The local populace knew the burial ground for Low Hill Cemetery, as it was called in Low Hill Cemetery. In its 73 years of use, the 4-acre cemetery was rammed with over 80,000 bodies. At one stage, allegations were even made that corpses had been exhumed from their designated resting places and reinterred into mass pits in order to make room for new, dearly departed people. So there were so many that were interned in the Necropolis, City of the Dead, that the plot was declared a hazardous to the health of those who lived around it, and the burial ground was closed in 1898. In 1914, with the headstones cleared, the plot was opened as a public space and renamed Grant Gardens. The park can still be visited to this very day, and earlier on this year I went for a walk around there as there was a local headline that said sinkhole opened up in old cemetery. Now I think it was January or February that the sinkhole opened up in what was one of the crypts inside, and it dropped. Unfortunately, I never got to see it in time before it was filled up quite fast by the council. Now, at some point I do tend to investigate this, as I think it's pretty cool to think that the park, which is for kids to play in, was actually the first municipal cemetery. Anyway, now with this park being able to be visited to this day and extending from the north corner of West Derby Road and Everton Road right up to Mill Road, occupying the exact same space as the Necropolis once did. Now, over the years, there has been some talk of Liverpool being provided with a tram system similar to what runs in Manchester, and a portion of the Grant Gardens site was to be excavated, and having been selected as a possible branch of the anticipated route, the plans had been quickly abandoned when the council forgot and then realised that there were over 80,000 nameless corpses that still to this day lay underneath these fields. So that plan was scrapped. So there are many who go to their burial place all too soon, very too soon, and some whose eternal rest is disturbed unduly by the meddling hands of the living. But in North Liverpool at least, it seems that there are also a few reluctant to stay within the confines of their grave. A family of phantoms have been seen at Stanley Park Lodge, and for many years Stanley Park has stood between the grounds of the city's two most famous football clubs. That is Everton's Goodison Park Stadium, which was built in 1892 and, believe it or not, was Liverpool's first football club. Now, it stands to the north of the park, and Liverpool's Anfield Stadium was built in 1884, lies to the southeast of both clubs. Histories are deeply entwined within the part of St. Domingo's Football Club, played in the southeast corner of Stanley Park, from 1878 until 1882, and in 1884 the team, now known as Everton FC, moved to Anfield, where they remained until rent increases forced the club to find a new home, and in 1892 they left without a team to play in his stadium. So leaseholder John Holding formed his own club, which soon became known as Liverpool FC. Today, Everton FC are discussing plans to move out of Liverpool and into the docks of Liverpool. So if that goes ahead, or when that goes ahead, that will be a fantastic move for Everton and the city. Although I don't know whereabouts it would be and what it would actually look like, so time will tell. Now, Stanley Park Stadium I think is what it's going to be called. It is meant to seat around 60,000 people. So it's going to be pretty big. And going back to the park itself, it was designed by Edward Kemp and opened on the 14th of May in 1870 by Liverpool's then Lord Mayor Joseph Hutbach. Telescopic stands were positioned at intervals along the park's impressive sandstone terrace, from which it is said that the viewer could see as far as the Isle of Man on a clear day. At one time boasting a boat lake, farmhouse, outdoor bathing pool and a myriad of Victorian and post-war follies. The park is now sadly a rather dishevelled and desperately in need of both restoration and preservation, although I will say the farmhouse has been done and is such a beautiful place to go, where it held many weddings, and I've also filmed a few weddings there in time as well. In fact, my sister actually got married there about 5 or 6 maybe more years ago, so it's a very good place now. Anyway, going back to Stanley Park Lodge, this was built around 1868, some 2 years before the park itself had been opened. Now, there were 112 years later, the property has been abandoned and boarded up when a young newlywed couple called the Sullivans decided to make it their home. And Wendy Sullivan was pregnant with their first child, which was called David, and at the time she said she felt there was nothing strange about the place initially. The first peculiar incident happened sometime around 1982 to 1983, and Mrs. Sullivan and her family lay in their beds, and this is the word of Wendy. This particular night, my husband was sleeping downstairs, though I can't quite remember why. I had David in the room with me and my daughter Jenny, who was sleeping at the opposite room in her cot. My grandparents also lived with us at this time, as they were sleeping also in the room across the hall. Now, I awoken abruptly by a tremendously loud noise. I can only describe it as a cross between a howl, a moan and a scream. I have never before or since heard anything remotely similar. The noise was so loud that it seemed to be bouncing off the walls in the bedroom. It was deafening. I didn't know what to make of it, and I was extremely frightened. This stopped suddenly. Absolutely. There was no residue or echo, just silence. I held my breath, fully expecting it to start again. I thought it was strange at the time that my son had not woken, and I would later learn that Jenny had not stirred neither. My heart was thumping in my chest. Then I saw the room's door begin to open very slowly. I held my breath. If anything non-human had come in, I swear I would have died. Luckily, it was only my gran, and she asked if I'd been making that awful racket, pointing out that it had been coming from my room. My husband downstairs heard nothing. Gran spent the rest of the night with me, but admitted that she would have thought twice about crossing the landing if she thought it was anything other than me making that sound. Over the next few days, there were several small scale incidents. Things like young Jenny talking of painted murals on her walls that had been dancing for her, and becoming very upset after saying that she had seen a lady walk across the landing and through the wall. Wendy was not overly alarmed because of these occurrences, but has made her position on the matter very clear. The subject of ghosts was not something I made a point of discussing with my children. Whenever they told me anything, I just sort of nodded and agreed. I didn't want them to be scared, and none of it was ever really discussed until a few number of years later, after we moved, when David was around 4 years of age. He told his mum that he was sad because the old man and lady were not allowed to come and tell him any more stories. Patiently, Wendy asked why this was, and this is David's words. He said that the bad lady had told them not to. He then went on to explain that this elderly couple used to come in every night and tell him stories before disappearing through the wall. He enjoyed their company and he wasn't afraid. He told me it upset him when he saw the little boy and girl go, though. David said he'd seen the children throwing a stuffed toy rabbit to one another in the bedroom and giggling when it accidentally went in the lit fire. In reality, the fireplace in that room was boarded up and unusable. The little boy put his hand in the fire to retrieve the rabbit and burnt it. The children started screaming and the lady ran into the room and she told them off. Now, it seems that the old couple were as good as their word, and young David was never visited again by them. Years after moving from the house, we got onto the subject of our one time at the lodge. David told me once again about what he'd seen and heard, but Jenny was strangely quiet and anxious. Eventually, she told me that she had also heard the children giggling and screaming, but that had been told that she wasn't supposed to tell anyone about it. If she told, she too would have to stay in the house forever and play. Now, in 1989, not long after the Sullivans left, Stanley Park Lodge became the Hillsborough Centre, providing support for those affected by the disaster which occurred at the Hillsborough Football Stadium in April of that year. Today, the building is being used by the council as headquarters for Stanley Park staff. Sadly, despite much searching online and in the records office, nobody has been able to find any information about the candidates for the ghostly family in the lodge's history. The council themselves have declined to comment upon the property's haunted status. Now, I'm sure if I am able to maybe get an investigation in here one day, it would be pretty cool. Or if I'm able to shed some light on its previous tenants, as these old places tend to have these strange things that go on with them. I find it strange, and I find it more of a confirmation that children of such a young age are able to possess the ability to come up with such a detailed story all by themselves. What 4-year-old would be able to make up a story about a girl and a boy are playing with a toy rabbit, throwing the rabbit to each other, and then after one of them throws it accidentally into the fire that the boy obviously didn't know was there, as it was boarded up, as a lot of these fireplaces are in old properties. And the boy had retrieved the toy rabbit from the fire and burnt himself and the toy rabbit. Now, how would a 4-year-old know, sometime in the 1980s when there was no internet back then as well, to even kids to look up stories, how would a 4-year-old know these details? I have to say it's near impossible. And then how would a 4-year-old be able to come up with that man and a lady then come into the room and shouted at the children and said that they're no longer allowed to play in front of these children? and the threat of the person telling the ghost, if that's what you want to call it, telling the young child Jenny that if she was to tell anyone about the upset, the disturbance, or whatever you want to call it, that she too would remain trapped in the house forever. That is something a young child, I doubt, would be able to create on their own accord. So this does give me some confirmation that this strange story has some truth to it. But as always, you decide. What do you think? If you think this is true, please let me know in the comments below. And if you are from Liverpool and have experienced anything around this place yourselves, then please do get in touch. For now, take care and see you all in the next video. And I'd also like to give credit to John Ripon, I can't remember how you pronounce his name. He wrote 800 Years of Haunted Liverpool, and this story was given permission from him to let me relate to you people, and I hope I've done it some justice. Take care, people. Peace.